Presto! Hi, everybody. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard. I'm a historical fiction fantasy author, and you're on Booktube, which is great because we're here today to talk about a book, BABEL, however you want to pronounce it, by R.F. Kuang. And I have a couple of friends. One is currently invisible. Visible friend, Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello?
So my name's Rachel. I go by R.K. Stumblingbear on Booktube. I like reading science fiction and fantasy. I read widely, though. I'm currently doing another year of judging for the self-published science fiction contest. So if you like self-published books, that's a fun place to go check out.
Oh, okay. Can you tell me the acronym again so I can put it as a link?
Yeah.
Self-published science fiction
contest. So
contest.
SPSFC.
Okay, cool.
Or they say SpecFus.
SpecFus. Oh, I get starting point services for children for that one. That is not .com. The wrong link. Oh, let's see. And sci-fi. Oh, maybe so that will help.
It is. Sorry.
Is it Reddit? We'll find the link and drop that for everybody. Oh, there we go. .org. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so Rachel's got the link. There we go. Excellent. So if some people like to read things like the Booker Prize or the Orange Prize or the Winner's Prize or all those different things, that is not my jam. I read whatever books come my way, and I don't really respond well to like being told, here's a list, here's what you can read. But other people like to do that as a challenge. So if you're one of those people, join in with the self-published sci-fi. It should be great. Let's see. We're waiting for Elisa to come back in. She had to change positions because her internet was like bad signal. So we'll wait for Elisa to come in to introduce herself. But I'll just say hi to the folks in the chat while we're waiting the first couple of minutes. Hello, Shannon. Lovely to see you. Hello, RC and Felicia and Anita and Cool Gamer. You guys are great. And Jim. Don't forget to boop the like button. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, Jim, you don't read prize books that often either, right? So not that this isn't a prize-winning book, right? So we're going to talk about BABEL today, and this is a book by R.F. Kuang, the author of the Poppy War series, which some of you may have read. It's epic fantasy. She calls it second world fiction, which other people might call historical fantasy because it takes many elements of historical record, but transmutes them into something that also has supernatural magic / other rules of the physical world, which is pretty cool. And what else?
I'm going to say BABEL did win the Nebulas, which is run by the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. So this is authors nominating and voting on books.
Got it.
It is award-winning.
It is award-winning. Yay, the Nebulas. Someone has their tabs on the award-winning world, which is great. Okay, so I think I've got everything sort of laid out introductory-wise. But I have a list of questions. And the first is, what drew you to the book? Because I think you had said you were going to read it before I said, ooh, I want to read it too. Let's do it together. So what attracted you to the premise or what you heard about this hyped book?
So I follow a lot of booktubers who talk about science fiction and fantasy, especially those who really like the Poppy War. So I was aware that BABEL was coming out long before it did. And I knew I wanted to read it. I actually picked it up last year in August and had started reading it, and then I had put it down because I was busy. And so then later on went ahead and just bought it knowing I wanted to continue with it. So when you said, oh, I'm interested in reading it, I'm like, well, I have it on my shelf. I keep saying I want to get back to it. This is a good reason to.
Good. Yay. Okay. So I was the impetus. I was the stimulant. Excellent. I got this at a hardcover sale because hardcovers are no joke. They're intimidating price-wise. So I think I got it half off at one of the Barnes & Noble like Christmas things. And it was one of those I'd heard about it because it's set in Oxford. It's historical. It's in the 1830s, which is a often neglected decade of the 19th century, and one in which my books appear. So I was extra like, ooh, someone else is treating this. The only other bigger name author or representation I've had of this is Gentleman Jack. So Anne Lister is also like an 1830s set story. So if anyone likes that, cool setting. Okay, Lisa's back. You ready to try again? Pop you up, say hello. Yay!
Hi, sorry, I'm in my car at a location of better internet, so sorry about the unorthodox.
Oh my god.
It usually works fine with Zoom, but definitely the sound doesn't coming through in my house. So.
Oh no!
Sorry.
Oh my gosh! So we've got a lovely view of the night sky.
Terrible! I can't get the lighting any better, so we're just going to have to work with this, I'm afraid.
It's awesome! It's awesome. So, say hello to the crowd. Let us know, what do you like to read, and what do you do on your channel?
Oh, that's a bit better. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa from Lisa in Bookland. Mostly I read historical fiction, I have to say, a little bit of history, but yeah, so this book is right up my alley, I suppose. But yeah, read a few classics and try to keep things a little bit broader as well, I suppose.
Nice. And we've just gone over the first question, which is what drew you to, are you going to say Babel or Babel?
Oh, I think Babel. I'm not too sure which have you been going with.
Well, I think so. Here's my, I don't know. I went to the source, and the Tolkien lecturer from R.F. Kuang, she says, I'm going to say Babel because that's how Americans pronounce it. And she was giving it in Oxford. So she said, but you can say Babel. I'm not British, so I'm not going to pretend to be. So however you want to interpret that. I don't know. It's like Irish.
Yeah, but yes, I actually came across a review in a fellow book. Well, actually, I think the first time I might have heard of it was somebody's upcoming releases video, but then a fellow Irish booktuber, R.G. Devilship, mentioned it, and yeah, she just mentioned it was really good. I suppose in an Irish context as well, that she was drawn to it due to the colonial past and that. So that immediately got my ears pricked, I suppose. But yeah. And like, who doesn't love kind of a story set in Oxford or kind of a dark academia? I don't read an awful lot about it, but it's immediately attractive to people interested in books, I suppose. So
yeah, and it's a good time for it. So just splash that across the whole video. Dark academia. If anyone's interested for the spooky season, there you go. Babel's a good hit.
Yeah.
So I'm following the chat here so we don't get too far from people's comments and I forget what they're talking about. Jim says, like you, I read The Poppy War, but I haven't read anything else by R.F. Kuang. And Rachel and I were just talking about this before, was that it's really cool that R.F. Kuang is not like other authors in that she just keeps leaping from different genre to different genre. So
yeah.
Epic fantasy to like second oral historical to Yellowface is like contemporary literary and now going into romance. So very exciting.
Wow. Yeah. No, I haven't read anything else by her, but yeah, no, it sounds great.
Yeah. Hello, Andy. Welcome. Let's see. Overall satisfaction. yeah. Two enthusiastic thumbs up. Yeah. 5 stars. Okay, brilliant. So we don't want people to think we're biased. All right, well, we'll have to give some good reasons for why we all liked it so much. Maybe they'll be different. What would you say in terms of comparative titles? Like if you had to compare this to something and say, it's kind of like this meets this. Does anything pop to mind when you guys would recommend this or when someone recommended it to you?
I don't have any comparative titles.
No.
Maybe it's just the setting, but potentially a tiny little bit of his dark materials. But like, they do know that there was kind of a little bit something a bit sinister going on in the background. But no, it's quite unique, really. I think the only thing I maybe thought of as well was that book Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but in the fact that it was kind of an alternative history set around the same time period and had like the footnotes as well. But yeah, no, that it is quite an interesting and unique book, I suppose.
Yeah, I that one does have a lot of comparisons as well. So yeah. How about what makes it unique? What popped out at you that was like, whoa, or bowled you over, or like stood out? Unique elements to BABEL. Oh, I like your cover, by the way. Your cover's got the shiny thing down the middle.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It's just a paperback, unfortunately, but yeah, no, it is a gorgeous cover. Like that definitely helped picking it up on the shelf, I suppose, as well.
Yeah.
So I think it's the friendship group, and just the whole setting was brilliant, but then just the kind of bits of reality that kept like peeking through all the time as well. But like definitely, if anybody's interested like language or the meaning of words, like it's obviously the author is Chinese speaking, and there's so much about it's people that knew more languages than just English, which is practically all I speak. I think they'd get a lot out of it as well, or people that have studied language that I think they'd find really fun information. It's obviously really well researched.
Yeah, the translation piece is really cool. You don't often get to talk about translation within a fiction context, and so you're like, oh, the meta layers are just so cool. Really good for the nerds. Rachel, how about you?
For me, what kind of hooked me on the book was starting off with the author's note at the beginning, where she just basically said, okay, these are some of my sources, but then anything that doesn't follow history, you're welcome to remember this is fiction.
Right.
You have that sass right from the beginning. And then going to the first chapter, like her writing is extremely lyrical. I was telling Margaret that I had read the first half of the first book in the Poppy War series, and her writing is consistent, I think, with this. You have that very lyrical writing. So I'm interested to later on to read Yellow Face and see how that compares.
Yeah, a very different setting, but like how is her style going to mold itself to the whole different format? Yeah, so good. Okay, I'm also going to ask you guys if you have questions. So if you have them, or if you want to think of them, like prepare them after I'm done with my few. Things about the setting. What did you love about the setting?
I always like the setting of at school. I think it's a great opportunity for characters to kind of figure out who they are, and whether it's like a boarding school setting or a university, I just like that.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the same here, and like the Oxford, I suppose, in general, but then like I think it was just I don't know if it's really the setting or just like the interactions between like the opportunity. Like I think at the start, I had a line written down. Of course, I didn't bring my notebook in the rush, but it was something like that. Professor Lovell is explaining Oxford to Robin before he goes there. He's like, oh, do you know, it's. You get to just go there and you're given all the tools you need. Like your food is cooked, you know, you have your accommodation, everything is paid. You don't need to do anything but just like study and learn. And I think that's just what everybody would like love to do.
So it's escapist fantasy is what you're saying for the first half, maybe.
Exactly, the first half. But yeah, that's the whole thing. Like you keep getting sucked into like this idyllic world of academia and learning, and then obviously you see the dark underbelly. But yeah, just like even the fact like Robin and I'm absolutely awful with names. Robin and his friend
Remy,
yes.
Remy.
Do you know that they have like adjoining bedrooms and like a sitting room? They can just meet up and have these like discussions and that.
Yeah.
And it's a really kind of idealized academic world. And even the silver, I suppose there is something like steampunk about it, kind of the way it makes the whole world work. So it just adds the extra layer. So yeah, no, it was just a really brilliant setting, I think.
Yeah. So I like love I went down a rabbit hole during the pandemic that was Endeavor flavored. I don't know if you guys have watched
it.
I was not big into Inspector Morse. Like old guy 80s show, my mom loved it, and I was like, yeah, that's okay, I'll pass. But when Endeavor came out, I was like, oh really, let me explore Oxford with this young gentleman in the 60s, right? So that was a really cool peek into like things that are political in the educational field, or like this ivory tower definitely mentality, and how the town and the gown interact, and like all that kind of stuff. So I had like a bit, like bits and pieces of like what Oxford might be, and then to make it historical and like expand on that in a magical way was like really cool to see the overlay on that. I really liked it. And of course, like I said, 1830s, that's also where I set my book, that like no one sets books. And so I was like, yes, these time periods. And strikes, and yes. And you're like, and Lisa also mentioned like when the reality peeps through. So I do have a question coming about modern parallels, and maybe we want to like dive into that now. But I thought that was a really strong part, that anytime you got too bogged down in how does this magic system work, or how does that translation really like provide for this magic, and anything like that, it was like, oh, and you know, rewind, look at the bigger picture. This is what the townspeople are rebelling against, and this is, you know, what they're refusing to see, and all those kinds of things. So yeah, modern parallels that you particularly appreciated or maybe thought didn't work, any, or reality parallels, I should say, any time period would do.
Maybe it's a slightly strange one for me, but I was nearly thinking it kind of nearly has a parallel with like global warming. Like, you know, there's you know, you can go on all these holidays and have a great time and do many things that are bad for the environment, I suppose, and you just kind of don't think about it at the time, and then, you know, like it's affecting countries that aren't necessarily Western countries and all that. So I don't know, you kind of don't really like to think about it too much, and I suppose that's kind of in the book as well, how like Robin doesn't want to think too much about things, and yeah, sometimes it just comes back to him. But yeah, that's what came to me anyways. But I'm sure there's still plenty of modern parallels with the kind of race stuff that's in the book as well, for sure.
Yeah. Rachel,
Right,
you want to wait?
You have something ready to go.
Okay, so I actually was reading this book while I was reading Poverty by America, and I was just like, like there's a lot of understanding of how like a ruling class, a oligopoly, if you will act in ways to perpetuate its power and oppress people in both of those books. And one is in the American context, and one is in the British Empire context of the 19th century. And so I brought this up in the poverty discussion, and it's a quote from page 390, where they're taking the trip to China, and Robin has just gone into an opium den and seen like a lot of bad shit, right? And so he's coming back out, and someone asks him how he's feeling or dealing with this, and he's having a hard time. He's worried. He says, because they don't care, said Robin. It's a war happening in a foreign land, Canton, that they can't even imagine. It's too distant for them to care. He's talking about Oxford folks. What makes you so sure of that? Asked Kathy. Because I didn't, said Robin. I didn't, even though I'd been told time and time again how awful these things were. It took witnessing it happening in person for me to realize all the abstractions were real. And even then, I tried my very hardest to look away. It's hard to accept what you don't want to see. And there is your total like parallel with climate crisis and like head in the sand, and you're benefiting from something, but you also don't want to acknowledge it because you don't want to, you know, lose any of those privileges. There are a lot of hard-hitting lines like that I really liked.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna say that kind of like is even mentioned earlier. I already had my book open to like 261, where Robin was talking about with the resistance about how far he was willing to go. He was fine as long as it didn't hurt him. And the contradiction, as long as you didn't think about it too hard or look at it too closely. And that is how a lot of people are. It's like, oh, great, I'm totally for this, as long as my life does not change.
Yes, exactly. And I had one more that was earlier. So I went back into all the little things that I tabbed yesterday to sort of refresh my memory. And there was one that was earlier that I thought, oh, it's foreshadowing of that quote that I like so much. It's 167. English did not just borrow words from other languages. It was stuffed to the brim with foreign influences, a Frankenstein vernacular. And Robin found it incredible how this country, whose citizens prided themselves so much on being better than the rest of the world, could not make it through an afternoon tea without borrowed goods. It's just like a curtain that drops, you know, like, yeah. So crazy how we live.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a really, really strong book with a very strong message in it, and I know that kind of was a bit too much for some people, I suppose, from other reviews, but no, it's no, I thought it was really, really well delivered.
Yeah,
that actually made me think about a news article I had read recently that was talking about how Spanish has shaped the English in Miami. For example, instead of to say get out of the car, people are now saying in English get down from the car, which is more of a direct translation to how it is said in Spanish.
Oh, okay.
Funny. Yeah.
Interesting.
Descendre is the similar for the French. So Shannon's saying, yes, love languages. Wish I had more time in the day to learn them. Chris reviews. Chris had a really cool review of BABEL just a few days ago. And so I was like, oh, yay, more people in the camp. She had a very provocative title for the video. It was like, is it worth it or something? And I was like, oh. And then she was like, yes. And I was like, okay, you're on the side of good.
Love to look at it.
And Victoria's here. Hello. So Chris says Yellowface is also amazing. So good to know. Yep. Jim says in 1991, I lived in Oxford for 6 months. Jim has lived everywhere. Jim has lived a charmed life. I like this. I like all the places he has.
Ellipses definitely make it sound like there's a further story.
I don't see a further story. But yeah. And then Rachel said, good to know. Victoria loved both BABEL and Yellowface. Yep. Jim says, darker shade of magic, Grey London was set around 1820. Oh, good pointing out. Is that? I don't know if I realized that. I read that series so long ago. I may not have been tuned in at that point. Have you guys read V.E. Schwab's Darker Shade of Magic?
I haven't. No, just Addie LaRue.
I haven't read Addie LaRue, so yeah, her more recent one.
Brilliant.
Yeah. This is a really good series. I loved it, so recommend. Victoria says, very cool when you read books that interact with each other in that way. I bet there's a term for that. I don't know what it is. If anyone knows, when you're multiple things and cross discipline just happens and your mind gets blown. I love it. And Leslie's here. Hello from Bookskers and Purrs. Okay, what about pacing, plot, structure? So moving away from the setting and the themes. What about you jumped out? What about that jumped out at you?
For me, I found it just very slow at the beginning. And then it reminded me of other books I have read that were written in the early 1900s. There seems to be a rhythm. So I was wondering if maybe this was supposed to be a conversation with other books that were written at that time. I know he mentioned some Dickens. I haven't read any myself, but I was thinking maybe that was possible. Also drawing that illusions because she just layers so much in her style.
I liked it anyways. I like the kind of split up into the books as well. I think there was 5 books in total, and each one ended with kind of a bang. You kind of had to keep reading. Yeah, no, I think I read it in a fairly short time period. I really enjoyed it anyways. I couldn't put it down, which is always a good sign. But I guess at the start there is a lot to try and get up to speed with, the characters, the world. You see all these footnotes and there's Chinese characters straight away. So yeah, it probably does take a chapter or two to get into it. But yeah, once you're caught, you're in for the long run.
I found it to be a total page turner. It was one of those things it was dessert that I was meeting out in small portions so that I didn't finish it too soon, and I was trying to make it last. Yeah, I think she tried to make it. So this is also from the Tolkien lecture. It's really good. I'll put a link when I'm not talking next so that people can see that video as well. But she said that she was trying to sort of imitate the structure or play with the structure of a Victorian, and Victober is coming up, Victorian novel of a coming of age, a Bildungsroman, a character study about someone who's coming of age, learning the hard truths of life and going on. And sort of dissecting that, playing with it in a different context, because looking back onto that style, we can definitely have commentary on, a Dickens or a who does those you see, now it's gone right out of my head now that I'm not thinking about Victober stuff. Anthony? Anthony
Trollope.
Trollope, thank you. Yes, Trollope. That's the word I should remember.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't think about that, but yeah, no, I suppose it should. Yeah, I suppose coming in, like maybe like David Copperfield or something like that. Like maybe you could see it kind of that way. But yeah, interesting.
And it's what else I find interesting is that there's several of those novels that have sort of come up on my radar. And most recently, it's The Fraud by Zadie Smith, who's also using Dickens type even style, like the frittering all over the place, all over the page, and the too many characters and the exaggerated characteristics and the mining trauma for comedy and all of those things that Dickens does for this like 19th century tale that she sets. And so I'm like very excited about that one. And there was another one where someone was imitating another like 19th century big name. And I'm like, this is a thing. I like this. I like this trend. So yes, let's see. Pacing, structure. Did I say something about the footnotes? No, I just said footnotes.
I love actually having the footnotes in there. Later, because you had asked what I kind of thought was comparable, and I was like, I don't have anything. But then I was thinking, kind of Jen Lyon's A Chorus of Dragons. That might not be the first one, but she does a whole bunch of different like footnotes as you're going along. So it's like an academic text. That's kind of what it reminded me of the footnotes part. But I loved how sometimes the footnotes are related to history, and sometimes they're related to backstory of characters that you would not otherwise have seen. Made it feel more immersive to what was actually happening. And sometimes you had the etymology.
Yeah. And I never felt like the need to skip them. Like, you know, even though it was a page turner, I think there was just the right number of them as well. Because if there's too many, and if they get too like, and I do feel like with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, there was maybe too many, and it kind of, you know, you got tied down in them. Or like, say comparable, like if there was like, you know, notes in a classic or something, if you flip back to them, you'll fall out of the story if you read every one. But they were just the right level of detail that they gave you extra information about the world, I think, without getting too bogged down. So yeah, I really liked them.
Yes, and in the Tolkien lecture, which I did just drop into the chat, if anyone's curious, she mentions that she was trying to imitate the academic style, but instead of sticking with academic content, which is like tiny details that no one cares about often, she was going into like the deconstructed version of, and you'll actually note that this was the truth, or this is how it happened, and you're like, oh good, I'm glad I know that reading along this tale. Definitely. And yes, thank you, Jim, mentioning Demon Copperhead. That's the other one I was trying to think of, by Barbara Kingsolver, which is inspired by Dickens' Copperfield as well. So I haven't read that book. Maybe I need to read that classic, but not this Victober. Just curious, are either of you guys going to be working on Victober in October? Rachel probably not. The campaign. Lisa.
I will be, yeah. I'm massively behind in my Victorian literature reading, so yeah, no, I'm definitely excited to try and fit a bit more in October.
Yeah, cool. I know Jim's on board. I was total slacker. I think I tried one last year and didn't even finish it. So, but I have a better plan this year, so I'm excited about that. Okay, so the homage to the Victorian literature, very appreciated. Setting, structure, what about characters? Okay, did any character completely set you off? Like, oh my God, throttle worthy? Or like what strong emotions were brought up when you think about the characters from BABEL? I'm very excited about this one.
I mean, Lovell pissed me off. Okay. You first met him, even when Robin's a kid, I'm like, oh, I just want to strangle this guy. And so he gets his comeuppance at the end, and I am happy.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Lovell, and like I think Playfair as well to a lesser extent maybe, but like he seems so nice, and then like I think one moment that really struck out to me for him, it's when he invented this new like protective ward for the tower, and it was so bad, but he's like, oh, do you know, they wouldn't even let me try it out in the dogs, but she was like happy that it worked so well on the human that tried to break into the tower. I don't know, because he seemed so like jolly and like nice for most of the time, but yeah, again, just that punch to the gut you get every so often with the characters. But
right.
Yeah, at least for
I
the
feel like it's a nice shiny red apple, but like the core is rotten and you can't trust it. Like,
yeah, and then it wasn't one of them. The details are a bit fuzzy on the end of the book for me now, but one of the lectures that was you know, everybody thought was a bit boring, didn't she? End up being one of the good ones at the end. We just check it. I should have asked this ages ago. But we are going full on spoilers here.
yeah.
Yeah,
so
okay.
we'll try not to give spoilers and just give like vague references. But yes, there is a professor who starts out like as a very like cross and intimidating professor, and then she like changes in the light of certain events. So
yeah,
we could say that. Yeah. Yes, and I have a quote about Playfair because I thought that was a really good comment. So on page 84, so relatively soon, and this is one of the ones I only saw when I went back in hindsight. They're talking about so I haven't given an overall like premise. So if anyone has been listening this far and doesn't know what we're talking about, Oxford is the place where the control of the empire is basically vested because of some magic powers with translation and silver bars, and that enables the Brits to go around the world and get money from the far-flung posts of their empire. And it's basically an overlay over the 19th century British Empire. So these students have come from these far-flung outposts to study at Oxford and use their languages to contribute to this science or magic. And one of the professors tells them that they can only enter the tower with the security in place if they give their blood in a vial, and that means that it's okay for them to go in and out because they're one of the chosen scholars. And Rami made a face, bit creepy, isn't it? And not at all, said Professor Playfair. You're in the place where magic is made. It's got all the trappings of a modern university, but at its heart, Babel isn't so different from the alchemist's lairs of old. But unlike the alchemists, we've actually figured out the key to the transformation of a thing. It's not in the material substance. It's in the name. And I was like, this is giving me big, but do you have a flag? Like Eddie Izzard vibes of like the mere changing of a name, the stealing of a language, the, extinction of a cultural practice, like these small things that aren't a substance, but will definitely have a terrible effect on a population when you're like trying to put them under your heel, perhaps. So I thought that was such a great quote. Playfair, good one. Okay. Let me catch up here on the chat. We've got Jim saying V.E. Schwab has a new book out on Tuesday. Oh, good. Thank you for the reminder. It's set in the Darker Shade of Magic universe. I can't remember. It's another sort of like 5-word title. But yeah, it looks very cool. And the art that she's put out on her Instagram looks very cool for that too. Chris is laughing at something. Of course, I can't figure out which that is at this point. Jim is talking about Martin Chuzzlewit for Victober. And Shannon says, don't have time for readathons, but kind of like my writing, I have seasons. So right now I'm devouring all of the Ice Planet Barbarians books. Nice. I like it. Oh. Okay, so readathons. That's the tangent I got off on. Characters. So I had this real push-pull relationship with Letty, and of course like that's understandable given like what I look like, but wait, let me put up a little spoiler banner because okay, so just for this little piece, and then I'll take it off when we stop. So Letty, you're in the points of view of the foreign students, and they have this constant push and pull with this friend in their cohort who is a white British girl and from the upper class. And so she has the sort of colonizer mindset, but she's trying to be friends with and thinks she is friends with these other members of her cohort, the 3 other students. And it's like the painful watching of a car crash when you're like, you want to trust that they're all on the same page. And then she just exhibits but this is how it is. Why don't you see that this is the real world? And they're like, that's your reality. That's not our reality. And so like the way that devolved was so painful, but so like true. So but I'm still angry at her at the end. So any thoughts on Letty?
I appreciated getting the chapter of her, and I think it was in the last book, and it was kind of out of it's so you're already mad at her, and then you get this chapter, you're like, this is telling me how she thinks, and I can see why she thinks this way, but I'm really mad that this is the conclusion of her thoughts. Even when you see the evolution of how she got there and how her goals just never did line up with the other three.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, so many thoughts about Letty. Like, she's so tragic, really. Like like you said, Margaret, you kind of can't help identifying with her. I suppose, like, not her thought process, I would hope, but, like, you know, just I suppose she's in the scenario that's most similar to ourselves. But just when she, you know, she really thinks, like, throughout, like, I don't think she's anyway patronizing to them or anything. Like, she really thinks she you know, she doesn't have an issue with them, but she doesn't see the problems either that they face in Oxford, and she thinks that she has it hard. Like, you know, I suppose when she had to get a scholarship and she's been kind of kicked out from her family, and she definitely thinks that she's got problems, but I suppose she doesn't really understand that they have extra problems, or like larger problems, or how they're affected by everything. Like, she mentions her father was, when she knows that Rami is from Calcutta, she just mentions her father was stationed in Calcutta, and it's not like they wouldn't be from the same kind of social circle in Calcutta now.
Right, or on the same side necessarily.
Yeah, but yeah, it was really disappointing. I say, like, it made sense, and like you said, you could half see it coming, but when it happened, you still were. I mean,
yeah, you wanted it to hold together, but you got the drops ever so often about like, back when we were all friends or whatever. Yeah, and Rachel brings up a good point, so I'm going to put this down. That there were chapters that were sort of like, not resumes. It wasn't in their point of view, but it was like following or giving more backstory on different characters besides Robin, and that was really unique too. And I thought that added something. And after it happened twice, I was like, oh, okay, we're going to get more of these. That's pretty cool. So
I think we got one from each of the cohort.
Yeah, which is nice. Okay. Characters, excellent. Themes, colonialism, inequality, cruelty. So those are like the big ones.
Also, the fight against the system. Are you going to try to fight the system by being a part of it, or are you going to just be like, no, we got to dismantle this and start over?
Do you have people that represent both of those sides
in the book? Yeah, I was going to say, they talked about Evie Brooks, and you could see where she's working within the system, making things happen, but then doesn't want to cross the line. And it affected her life after that, from what she did choose.
Good point. Okay.
Yeah, like it's kind of interesting, like Robin, like I think he wants to work within the system, like he's like, oh, do you know, I could just not accept like certain types of work or that, but then they're saying it's like impossible, you know, that it's such a big part of their revenue, the military stuff, that you couldn't avoid it. And yeah, I don't know if maybe it's a criticism that you can't really do change from within such a corrupt system. I don't know, they had to basically break it. They you know, they just couldn't. It wouldn't work that way. So, yeah.
Professor Chakraborty, I think, is also like exemplifying this.
Yes, yeah.
What he's doing, but at the same time, he sees like this isn't all good, and he's trying to affect change where he can within the system.
Yeah. Good points. When you're talking about working within the system and how ultimately, like, the main character changes his point of view in terms of like how effective that is, I feel like I get called back into the octopus that I was reading with Barrett a while ago, in that like the tentacles are everywhere and you really can't, you know, have a good thing from one tentacle when it's like connected to the beast on the other end. Yeah. Was there So I wanted to ask if there was anything special that came up that was referencing the Irish relationship with the colonial past of Britain. Were there any like pings that we might have missed that you wanted to point out, Lisa?
No, I suppose Kathy was the only like Irish character in it, and she's evolved a little bit, but I suppose not too specifically from like she didn't talk too specifically about Ireland. But the one thing I thought was interesting is she said like I think it was Robin mentioned she's so chatty, probably because she's only one of like two faculty members in her like subspecialty of like Irish or Gaelic as it's called in the book. So it's kind of amazing really that they're going all the way over to like to Asia and China and India to get these languages, and there is like, and that Irish isn't spoken in Ireland now very prevalently, but at the time like the majority of people in Ireland, they're from lower classes, would have been speaking Irish, so they just ignored this huge resource pool of people that are in a country right next to them. Like it's like that's kind of, I don't know, typical.
Yeah,
really. Yeah, because they're saying that like all these like that Latin and Greek and things are in French are like stopping working and they're searching for alternatives, but they just don't see right beside them.
Right. Would that have something to do with the fact that they were also like mining raw materials besides language? Like they were looking for silver, they were looking for you know,
I suppose that's true. Well. Yeah. But now when I just said that out loud, maybe I don't know for sure, but maybe Kuang is maybe too familiar with Ireland. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but she does compare it to like Manx and Cornish, which I'm not an expert, but I do think they wouldn't have been as prevalent in England or in the Isle of Man as Irish was in Ireland in the 1830s. So it might be just maybe it's a small little lack of research there, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's a lot in this book. If she missed one little thing, I wouldn't blame her.
Right, there is a lot in the book. Let's see. Victoria. Yeah, exactly. Okay, we'll leave that up. Colonialism, inequality, cruelty. One of the other things I thought that was a really poignant theme was like the whole two culture. So when you focus in on the experiences of the individuals within the system, it's that they're constantly torn between feeling seen and then feeling completely invisible. And I thought that was really well done in terms of mostly looking at Robin's experience of this and his so-called family, whatever is left of a family that he has, then his found family and how that's also somewhat contentious, and like the way that echoes translation and how that there's this power that comes from not having everything equal, words to words in different languages, and that there's a difference and that this births magic. But in a person, the fact that you can't really feel comfortable in two places, or you do in different ways, it's just like turmoil rather than some sort of magic power. I mean, you do have skills in both areas, but like that's also sort of a burden. I thought that was really cool. You guys tune into any of that or have a different take on the translation theme? What did you think? Anyone?
Yeah, no, I think it's like maybe Robin nearly forgets himself for some time, but I think one of the most powerful scenes with him is when he's negotiating with those traders and they're talking about Chinese men, and then he's like, "Sir, I'm Chinese." Like, people like, I suppose he's lived in England so long. I suppose he has the Western manners and probably mostly a Western accent. And then people forget sometimes when they're looking at him, even though he looks Chinese. But he just definitely has that conflict, I think.
That kind of also goes with Letty when she was like, "But those other countries aren't your motherland anymore," and they're like, "Oh no, they still are. Just because we're here, that doesn't mean we cut ties or forsaken them."
Right. Your parents are always your parents.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the translation parts, and I think maybe I really resonated with the beginning of this book because I'm used as a Spanish interpreter, and like a lot of the things I've been trying to get through to my boss when it comes to interpreting, I just, as she was writing things, I'm like, yes, that's exactly how it is. Someone said something. it does not translate. I don't know how to tell you what they just told me, but I understand what they said. And just like even when I'm talking to clients in Spanish, and then someone's like, well, I don't understand why they're upset about something. It's like, because language comes with culture. It's not
in a vacuum.
Separate. I was like, I think that's also where, I don't remember where it is, but yeah, just there's always many people have said that when you speak another language, when you're speaking that language, your personality changes because you become a different person in that other language. And I know I've seen that happen with me, and I've seen that happen with other people. People are very quiet in English, and then they're speaking another language and very gregarious and outspoken or outgoing, and they're not quite. It doesn't cross over because of their different groups aren't the same as well. So like for the translation section, all the stuff at the beginning, I'm like, yep, that's how I feel. Yep, that's how I understand that.
What about the quote that one of the professors, probably Playfair, talks about how like he's trying to get them Socratically thinking and says, well, it ends up with saying something like translation is always a kind of betrayal because you're caught between being true to the original language and true to the translated language, and the sense and the spirit, like the letter of the law, spirit of the law kind of argument. And I was like, that is really true. And yeah, translators are like overlooked often in terms of what they're delivering, and it's not original work. Well, it's like, how do you measure that? You know, how do you treat that with the respect it deserves? And
that reminded me, I think, if I remember right, I think Kuang wrote an essay in the collection, The Way Spring Arrives, about translation. And when I read that, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's kind of what her topic was, or her theme in that essay. But some other translators also talk about it. And they have these essays about translation in between the stories that have been translated, and just that overall. Sorry, I'm being given a note. Overall, that translation, you have that conflict of how faithful am I going to be with it word by word, or this is what this means, and am I going to say that? And I actually have that when I'm interpreting, like myself, because when you're a medical interpreter, you're supposed to do word by word, but sometimes then what gets translated doesn't actually make sense. And so you do have to change it so they understand it. It's what it actually means.
Good points.
And I remember Ken Liu talked about this when he translated, I'm now blanking, Xian Liu's work, The Three-Body Problem, that there was many cultural references. And so he had to think of how he wanted to translate, if he just wanted to, like, which ones needed actually more information for people who didn't know about the Cultural Revolution in China, and which ones like he could just keep going and let people like look it up if they wanted to. And I think he also helped like restructured the English version from the way it was in Chinese, just because of the pacing.
Yeah, it's so many things you don't even think of when you're like reading a translation. Like one of the things that I kind of was puzzled by and like don't know where to land on from a readathon is the women in translation. I've mostly had available to me Japanese translated to English books, and they seem to have like, I don't go for the horror ones obviously, so like I end on the sweet side, and they seem to have the same kind of tone. Different authors, different time periods, different translators, but I'm like, why do they all feel the same coming to me? And I'm wondering like if there's some like translators convention about the tone of Japanese novels that is being adhered to that I'm like missing so many nuances, or I don't know. If anyone has comments on that, let me know, because I'm very curious. I should ask my brother because he lives in Tokyo. Speaks Japanese, so but he doesn't read books, so I don't know if that would be a very fruitful answer.
A good person to ask would be a booktuber called Made Between the Pages. She also lives in Japan and has been reading in Japanese to get better with her. language.
Nice. Okay.
She's fluent.
Heidi, I can't remember her name, but I remember her introduction. Yeah, she's great. Okay.
I suppose it is inevitable that you get, like, I don't know how many, you'd think it must be quite a small pool of people, that because you'd have to have some literary skill as well as the language skill, and I'm sure certain translators are tied to different types of fiction and that. So yeah, I suppose it is some similarity would be inevitable, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, wait a minute. Yeah, when I was looking at all of them,
to learn the language, so you'd love to be able to read the original, but I think we'll have to stick with books in translation for now.
Right. And some of them are very cool, so I'm very excited for like some of them coming out. Okay, so translation. We've got quotes and modern parallels, so we already touched on it a bit. There's like moral things, and then there's a whole bunch of like economic gears. So when you look at the steampunk gears next to me, so I did study economics for a while, and I'm still working off that karmically speaking. But some of these things really rang true as a way to signal certain things in the book. So like, let me point some of them out. I have like 3. So if you guys have like certain themes that sub-themes, motifs you want to bring out, feel free to get the quotes ready. So 175, this is Robin, our main character, talking to Griffin, who is a member of the Resistance. And they're running out of silver, said Griffin. Can you guess where it's all flowing now? This Robin knew the answer to, only because he'd heard Professor Lavelle and his friends complaining about it for years during those sitting room nights in Hampstead, China. And this made me think of, with my nerdy economics mind, balance of payments crisis, and like the whole thing with America and China and competitiveness, and the fact that like China makes all the stuff and America like pays all the money, and like we don't like that because that means our money's going away, and like well, that's the point. So just like economic power and sort of feeding that directly into the magic system was pretty cool. And then we've got, okay, before we get into strikes, I'll go to 469. I'm such a nerd. I got all my little tabs. So 469. Okay, and this is, should I put up a spoiler? I guess I'll put up a spoiler banner for just a second. This is when the Resistance has taken over the tower, and they're taking out the first of like the rods that help resonate and control the other things in the Empire. So basically like taking out a convoy if you're, in a war zone or something. So they took out 24 rods, and this is how BABEL was designed to work, said Professor Chakravarti. We made the city as reliant on the Institute as possible. We designed bars to last for only several weeks instead of months because maintenance appointments bring in money. This is the cost of inflating prices and artificially creating demand. Ding, 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 ding. It all works beautifully until it doesn't. And I was like, oh, government shutdown? What? Did someone, what?
Yeah.
And I was just like, bells were ringing. We were talking about inflation and pumping demand. And I was just like, gosh, she's doing this so slyly with just a few remarks there that I just like really zinged for me. How about you guys? Anything particularly from like what you work on or your disciplines that came up that maybe others haven't noticed?
I can't say I like, but the economic stuff, I'm sure understood the very surface of it, not being business minded at all. But that line you mentioned first about the flow of silver and how they're running out of silver and how it's linked to with the slave trade and things eventually was that was really fascinating, just to think about money going that way. I suppose on economics trained people wouldn't ever think that you'd be running out of money or that kind of thing. So that was really interesting. But nothing specific to my field of work, I'm afraid. But it was maybe I'll let you go ahead first, Rachel.
I had nothing specific about my field of work either. What did make me think of everything, how the economics was tied to the strikes. And then that made me think of the strikes that are going on right now with the Hollywood actors and writers, and then they're now talking about auto worker strikes. And I'm just like, oh, yes, I see how this is matching up here. And I also, I don't remember a lot of my history, but when she was talking about all the different groups with the silver industrial revolution, I liked how she kept was adding the silver.
Yeah.
I remember I think she was pulling in a lot of the economics and turmoil that was happening at that time due to other technological things that were happening in our
the weavers and the factory workers, exactly, that were getting kicked out by production enhancements. Yeah.
And then in the book, it's made because of the silver versus other technology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But wasn't there I really feel like this book, it's a bit of a cliche, but there really is something in it for everyone, like the economics bit, the language bit. I think people that had jobs in academia or were really involved in that world would also get a lot out of the discussion of that.
Yeah.
And then there's the colonialism, there's just so much. And then
there's the plot. Then there's there's stuff getting blown up.
Their friend group, when it was good, it's just it was really beautiful friend group, I think, and one we'd all envy a little bit. So yeah, there's just so much packed in. It's a long book, but I really feel like you could definitely get a series out of it, or at least a sequel. So yeah, maybe it'll happen.
The ginger biscuits at the cafe in Oxford. Don't you want to go there? I want a little theme park.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I did see a lot of parallels with politics as well on bigger scale. Where they talk about Parliament, and then thinking, just as you mentioned, with Congress and government shutdowns, but even oh, hey, we really want you to do this. And they're like, yeah, that's nice. We're going to do what we want. It doesn't matter what everybody's writing in or protesting about. We're going to, Congress sometimes likes to get ahead of themselves. And, the way our democracy works in America, you get to vote for your representative. You can't control somebody else's.
Mm. Yeah, I hear a lot about strikes in France at the moment, and that whole thing about the reliance on the center. It made me think of my old Paris history classes where centralization happened in the beginning of modern Europe, and I was like, okay, so there's that. I hear about strikes in France. I hear about historical strikes in Britain, not just 19th century, but also 40s, 50s, 60s, 20s. And train things going on and that sort of thing recently, but healthcare, I don't know that they've done anything for the healthcare workers on strike, but anyway, so definitely trickling around. Is there anything happening in Ireland on this? Is there strike action?
Not a strike, but maybe
you got to figure it out, right?
Not yet, not at the moment. But that I'm aware of, anyways. But there was kind of an instance, more in the end of the book, where there was kind of protests outside the Parliament called the Dáil in Dublin, and it kind of got a bit violent. So there's a lot of discussion going on about that at the moment. So yeah, maybe more like the end of the book, but yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I haven't seen those headlines, so now I want to go investigate. Yeah.
Something that I've been I was studying about when they mentioned how, oh, hey, actually it's illegal for us to strike in the book. I was like, why would it be illegal to strike? And then I found out recently in Kansas it's illegal for teachers to strike. Not every state allows their teachers to actually strike when they're upset about their conditions and feel like they aren't getting through with their school boards. And I was like,
you gotta have a law for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's over here. I hope I'm not mistaken, but I don't think the guards are allowed to spot a strike. The police force, I don't think they're allowed to go.
There's something about emergency workers and specifics that varies here as well. Yeah. Well, yeah. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
The thing I had on the strikes, 462. The swing riders, that was kind of cool. That's definitely historical fact. I just turned the corner down for this one because I was very certain at this point that I was keeping this book and that I'd want all my notes still in it, but I didn't like indicate what I was pointing to. Basically, they're talking about the different historical strikes and how they failed, and how Robin is trying to envision that his strike is going to be different and be successful. There was at least, this is probably what I did. There was at least one reason to hope. They were running on momentum. And I feel like this is what we have right now in the US. The social forces that had prompted the Luddites to smash machines had not disappeared. They had only grown worse. Silver-powered looms and spinning machines were getting cheaper and more ubiquitous, enriching none but factory owners and financiers. Each year, they put more men out of work, left more families destitute, and maimed and killed more children in machines that operated more quickly than the human eye could track. The use of silver created inequality, and both had increased exponentially in England during the past decade. The country was pulling apart at the seams. This could not go on forever. And I'm just like, oh, that's a bop. That is a bop right there.
Oh dear. Yeah. Is there kind of a slight parallel with the internet as well, with the silver? Like when they're like, if the silver ever went, they'd be completely crippled. If the internet went, we'd be completely crippled as well. So yeah. You'd hope that it's not as vulnerable to one group of people, but you never know with hackers and things like that. So yeah.
I don't think I'm the only one who's thought about like, what's my escape plan if that goes down, or like, the what is it? Supply chain system breaks down again. Like, that was a big thing, and people were losing access to things that they really needed. And so this is a big reality check 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good.
Oh, okay. What's our positive note to end on? What questions do you guys have? So I know we're running a little long here, but what questions does this bring up in your minds, or what questions did you have for me, maybe, that you were curious about the book, about my opinions? Anybody in the chat's opinions?
Which do you think was your favorite character? I suppose they were all so complicated, the main four. Somebody actually said to me in a comment that they didn't think the characterization of Babel was particularly good. And I think nearly when I thought about the individual characters, I could nearly see their point. But there was so much else going on, and like the interaction between the characters, I didn't even really think too much about it. But like I think they were all so complex. There was no real between the four of them. I just really liked Letty for sometimes, and then and, like Robin was great, but then I think Rami was nearly the most awake of them. Like he knew what was going on, and he he had a bigger plan maybe, but there was just so much to them. Sorry, I answered my own question before hearing yours.
No, that's good. I'm searching. I'm like scanning all the contents, and I don't have an answer yet. So Rachel, do you have an answer?
Yeah, my favorite character is Victory. I'm not sure if I'm saying that quite right, but
Victoire. That's how I said it in my head.
Huh?
Victoire,
yeah. For me, I just found that she was kind of quietly watching everyone else and noticing, okay, we have this contradiction here. Okay, we have this here. And I think maybe it's because she also interacted the most with Letty, and she really wanted to be friends with Letty because they had some things in common, but also realizing that Letty was never going to be the type of friend that she needed. That made me think a lot of, we have different types of friends in our lives, and not everyone can always give us everything that we need, which is why we have multiple. And for her, what she was getting from Letty was another female, someone who spoke French. But then the boys were other types of friends that she needed, who understood what white society was, how it was treating her.
Yeah, and I think at one point they're kind of given like everybody's like role in the group, and I think it's they said that Victoire is like the really good listener who's good at like listening out to everybody's problems and whinging and complaining, and she probably had a good bit of practice. All right, yeah, she was great.
Yeah,
but I also like how she, when we do get her chapter, kind of finding out about her back history, you see that her goal at the end is very, very different than what it was when she first got to Babel, but it is still a part of her core being.
Yeah. I'm just going to catch up the chat for a second. The Way Spring Arrives, I dropped the link for that book that Rachel mentioned. I didn't know about it. I'm bad on the collections that I'm not in. So this sounded really good. If it's essays on translation, that sounds really cool from Tor.
It does have it has short stories that have been translated as well. So you're getting science fiction and fantasy short stories. And then the translators have little bits in them as well.
Really cool. Okay. Victoria says, Books with Lee is trying to read one book from every country in Asia this year. I don't think I know that channel, so I will definitely check them out. Thank you, Victoria. And assume she'll do some kind of wrap up at the end of the year. Very cool. Rachel left my between the pages. I can't link. Well, anyway, you can find it looking for that term. So that's good. Yeah. Victoria says, I think I saw a review saying it was too extreme because it would be the equivalent of the internet going down. And I was like, yeah, that's the point. Yeah. And then Victoria says, Victoire and Letty's relationship was one of the most interesting parts of the book for me. Will they, won't they? Right? Totally. Yeah.
And I think the thing we didn't really discuss is like them as like females in Oxford as well. Like that was really interesting. That they had to dress up and things. So it's just another little subplot. So yeah, that was great.
When I was going over it, there was a thing when they go on that trip to Canton as like almost graduates, and the professor is warning them about how they treat women and how it's like barbaric, and she's like, "Oh, really? I don't know what that's like because we had to do the exact same thing in Oxford to avoid getting abused."
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. So my answer to the character question is that so I just wrote a Patreon post about the ideological novel and the mashup of that and like earnestness not being in style. So the token lecture that I've mentioned once or twice is R.F. Kuang talking about her novel being a novel with a message and like being open about that. And like the fiction is the way that she uses to appeal to people. And I totally am on board with that. It can be done badly, but it's done very well in this case, I think. And like, she invests her characters with such sincerity and purpose and like turmoil and, being torn over these decisions that like, this is my jam. This is what I like to write. This is what I like to read, like really getting into those nitty-gritty topics. But she also provides us with these like exaggerated minor characters that are just funny. So like the scene with the undergraduates who are the dipshits, like the ones who are the cool kids, right?
Yeah.
Robin gets invited to one of their parties and he goes because he wants to see what it's like. And they're like swooning over poetry, of course, in the 1830s, and it's bad. Yeah. So like that was much appreciated. The trader in China, when they go over and he's just like racist run off at the mouth, and you're just like looking at him going, you're hilarious. You're not realizing what comes out of your mouth and like how transparent it is to these other folks what you're concealing. And like, I thought those characters are really brilliant. So I will use that as my answer.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing that she says in the question and answer period of that lecture is that there is no sequel to this. It is a finite ending. But her partner, her now husband, I guess, is very interested in seeing, and people have asked for, if she wants to do another book in this world, a prequel about Griffin's sordid past and how that developed. And I was like, ooh, that would be so good. Yes. So, because his journey is really interesting.
Yeah, or even like further back. Like I think she just put so much effort into setting up this universe. I just think it'd be such a pity not to get another book out of it.
I know.
Yeah, I'll have to see. I must watch that lecture. Make it sound really interesting. So yeah, I'll have to look it up.
Yeah. Rachel, do you want to say something? Okay. I thought you started.
Sorry, 2 seconds, guys. Oh my God.
Oh, I hope we haven't lost her. I hope it's just for a second. I was gonna like intro us out anyway. Closing thoughts?
I do have one last one. Something with this book is I did find that she stayed very true to the thoughts and ideas of the 1830s. There were a couple things that were said amongst the friend group that made me mad. But then I remembered, oh, this is the 1830s. This is actually what people thought about this topic. So I was like, okay, I can accept it in that case.
All right. So it might be a content warning that some people would appreciate, but also like realistic and true to the times. If you're in it to read it, then you might as well like just be prepared to read those things.
Yeah.
Good noticing. Thank you. Okay, so closing up, since Lisa's in her car and wants to go home.
No, I'm outside my uncle's house and he just came out. She's like, "Are you okay?" Oh my God.
Did you explain the situation? Emergency booktube.
Oh, stop, please. I actually have taken work calls like sitting on the path outside his house. My internet improved, but apparently not good enough to stream online. So at least I will know for the future.
Oh boy. All right. Well, we've appreciated you hung on like remarkably long with like perfect internet. So knock on wood. Glad to have you both here. Do you guys have anything coming up that you wanted to point people to, like any events or like readathons you'll be participating in that you want to like let people know about before we close out?
I do not. Since I am running for school board in my local area, my content is a little bit more sparse right now. So I don't have anything exciting coming up in the future, not until at least after November.
Awesome. Come on, November. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be taking part in October and things, but yeah, my content has been sporadic due to chaos at work. So yeah, hopefully November will be more regular content again. But yeah, no, it's there's so many great booktube events. It's hard to keep track of them all. But October is one that definitely sticks in my head.
Yeah,
and November, of course, coming up in November, which would be nice.
Which one in November?
And nonfiction November. Yeah,
yes.
So it's good to get some history in there.
Big fan.
Yeah.
The only things I have coming up are like autumnal readathon recommendations, and then a little planathon on October 6th. So if you guys are planners, if you like to do bullet journaling stuff and you want a little work session, October 6th is when I'll be inviting a couple people on to do that in the morning here, in the evening in Ireland. But yeah, if you're interested, pop on by. And thank you both, lovely folks, for coming on and discussing this wonderful book that we all loved. So I don't know if we'll convince anyone who wasn't convinced before. Go read it. All right, thanks everyone for watching. Lovely to have your comments and extra tips in the chat. So appreciate it. And happy reading, everybody. Take care.